Let's welcome today's Fireside Chat guests, Dominique, Andy, welcome. It is great to have you both join us today. Let's start with some brief introductions on yourself and what your company does, and also what your role is. Dominique, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much, Kavitha, for the introduction. So I'm Dominique. I'm the CIO of VINCI Energy for the past 10 years now. Time is passing so fast in these CIO roles. VINCI Energies is a subsidiary of the VINCI Group, which is one of the most important construction and concession group in the world. If we look at only VINCI Energies, we are 82,000 employees around the globe, about 14 billion euros turnover. We are operating in 53 countries, even if Europe is still 85% of our turnover. And we're a very decentralized business model with more than 1,800 local business units that are working in infrastructure, in industry, building solution, and some information and communication technology. So this is where we are. And I would like to mention that the energy does not mean we are producing energy. We are a project-based company. We are deploying, installing, maintaining tools for the four industry I've just mentioned previously.
Thank you for that introduction, Dominique. Andy, what about yourself?
Oh, hey, good morning, everybody, and good afternoon, depending on your location. My name is Andy Brown. I'm the CEO and founder of Central East. Central East was created as a mechanism first to drive, fintech and fintech capability in New York and London, and secondly to help Silicon Valley companies get more connected to customers. I've been actually with Zscaler since 2013, as first of all as an advisor, and then secondly as a board member since 2015. I'm also on 2 other public boards and 3 private boards as well. I spent my career in financial services for 20 years at UBS, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Credit Suisse, and Bank Paribas, which is something I have in common with Dominique as well. And then I did 10 years prior to that in telecom, pharmaceutical industry, and the oil industry as well. So I'm really looking forward to today's panel and going through the discussion we're about to have.
Wonderful. So Dominique and Andy, as we've all sort of been witness to what has been occurring over the last 12 months, there's been a significant change in just the general topology of organizations. I mean, with COVID obviously pushing most companies to react rapidly to sort of work from home and work from anywhere, we've also witnessed sort of the speed of migration to cloud has accelerated, and also the dependency on cloud vendors by organizations that have gone up dramatically as well. Dominique, are you able to share with us how the topography of your organization specifically has evolved over the last 12 months? And also as a CIO, how has your role and that of your IT team shifted and or adapted to this change?
Yeah, I think what we have gone through the past 12 months was, something new for everyone, first of all. Lucky we started an IT journey many years ago where we have been moving a lot of things into the cloud. We are Office 365 since 2013, so we are very early adopter. We are using now lots of SaaS solution, and since more than 10 years, we are using ZIA from Zscaler to protect ourselves. And we were lucky in the fact that 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, we started to deploy ZPA for the tunnelization, and that was not, the purpose of COVID. Nobody could expect COVID. So when we had the lockdown last March in France, first of all, the role was, IT department was under stress from the business standpoint to make sure we ensure the continuity of the business with thousands of employees bringing back home their PC or the laptop and the desktop and trying to work. Hopefully, we were already running, as I mentioned previously, some tools with tunnelization. We were able to put all of this person in a secure way and working from home. At that time, what you have seen as well, that despite all the communication in terms of digitalization, in terms of the usage of SharePoint, OneDrive, usage of Teams, and all of these tools that, when you're in the IT department, you think that everyone will just, use. We discovered that many users didn't really get it, and they were not able to use all of these tools because there was still storing local file in local server, or not using the team video and didn't know how to really use. So lots of a big push on the training on our side to the end user. But the good news is that after just a couple of weeks, we have been able to operate again as previously. And that was really the good part. The second good part, I would say, of this crisis is that suddenly the C-level executive, well, they just discover that we are able to operate from any time, everywhere, any point, any home, every office, thanks to the investment we have been making the previous year. So I think it was a very interesting to see that the mindset of some C-level executive clearly states after the crisis, hopefully you did a good job and we are there. But again, that's the good part. Now the bad part is, and we are there to talk about security, we have removed a lot of things to the cloud, but we see more and more, and that's something we'll elaborate probably later on, we see more and more in the past 12 months an increase in the number of attack and cyber attack, and that's my, currently that's now my number one issue.
Mm-hmm. No, Andy, are you seeing, similar trends with other companies as well? And, kind of what are some of these imperatives that you have observed to be emerging from this like shift in topography?
Sure. I mean, we've seen most of our major clients, who are really banks and insurance companies on the kind of other side of our business, if you like, adapt very, very rapidly to this, both from, their traded businesses and from the support workers, the wealth management teams, and so on. And they've all had to struggle with the same exact issues that Dominique highlighted. I think what's happening now is that the level of automation, both around the way that computer hosting or application hosting is done, has changed reasonably dramatically over this period of time as well. But so has the automation of work for just regular workers. So platforms like ServiceNow, as an example, have been much more broadly adopted and have been used as a mechanism to make digital workers and hybrid and home workers much more effective. So I think there's been a productization, if you like, of processes that deliver work for people to do at home. Whereas before, a lot of that might have been done via email or via word of mouth or the water cooler or whatever. So there's a formalization, if you like, of work processes, another outcome that we've seen. And then, hybrid work started to be thought about probably around September time, with most of the major companies we work with starting to look at their real estate footprint and trying to understand what it might look like in the post-COVID world. And I think post-COVID is a kind of term that people are also trying to come to terms with. Like, what does that mean, right? Because kind of right now, it's not post-COVID and it's not clear when it will be, but there are people going back into office buildings in New York 1-2 days a week, for example, right now. So I think that kind of, what does the future look like? The future of workplace and work, and this notion of hybrid work where people are part-time in the office, part-time at home, and part-time on the road for people who are in road-based employment, is going to be almost a revolutionary change. I think we're going to see a complete difference in the way people plan, mainly because of the executive impact that Dominique talked about. Now the executives understand better that you can be very effective working in anywhere, basically. I think it changes the perspective on what you need from a real estate point of view, and actually how you use real estate too. So that's one of the really big changes that often people don't highlight, I think.
I think this whole, and as you touched upon, right, this notion of hybrid work or life after COVID is here to persist for an indefinite period of time, and will revolutionize how we all approach the workplace forever. I think it's a revolutionary shift, and sort of the corresponding technologies, practices, and automation that have to follow will continue to, I think, evolve and iterate in the next 12 months. And we'll all have a role to sort of play in that. So Dominique, you touched upon this a little bit in terms of, cyber risk increase, right? So when the SolarWinds attack hit the headlines in December, of last year, needless to say, just took the InfoSec world and everybody by surprise. Not just in terms of how unanticipated it was, but because of also sort of the depth of penetration in the technology supply chain that it hit, and the span across, its exposure to some of the world's largest brands. I think we can characterize it and recognize it to be one of the most impactful attacks in history to date. But right on the heels of that, SolarWinds hack, we had the Microsoft Exchange server breach. What are you seeing? Why and how is this more imminent now more than ever in the industry? I mean, especially from from your role as a CIO and as you interact with your peers, what are you seeing?
Well, this kind of attack are very, very dangerous. We all know that because it's 0 day and you have to react extremely rapidly. That means as a CIO that you have to manage all the assets you have in the enterprise, which is honestly, and we'll maybe talk later about that, almost impossible when you are very big companies in many countries with lots of acquisition. Extremely difficult to manage and know every asset you may have. So the risk is very heavy at the moment. And with this attack, I think they are happening more and more at the moment because, well, I mean, frankly honest, these guys, the guys that are using or exploiting these vulnerabilities, they want money. There is billions of euros to make with this attack. And well, so more people are searching for vulnerabilities in many, many products. And then as soon as one vulnerability gets on the market, I mean, guys are trying very quickly and rapidly, we have seen it on the exchange as an example, trying to use it to scan the full web and search for exchange server that were vulnerable to attack and try to attack, make a crypto, send a crypto locker on their companies and ask for money. So yeah, that's the main driver at the moment. SolarWinds a little bit different because it seems that it's a state preparation of cyber attack. So as a CIO, I would say nothing I can do against a state, to be frankly honest. So we'll have to try to manage as much as we can in case of something happens. What are your response time? How you can react as quickly as possible? How you can close the breach? And you have to be prepared for the crisis. I think it's very important. Be prepared for the crisis because we don't know when. But unfortunately, it will probably happen in my during the time I will be a CIO.
And building resilience, right? Into, as you said, in terms of prevention, but also how you react and make your organization and your processes a lot more resilient to impending attacks. So would it be safe to say that this is one major critical issue that keeps you up at night as a CIO today?
It is definitely my number one. It's funny because a couple of years ago we have been through a kind of security agenda, and we have been working a lot internally, and we have put in place some strengthen the password, put in place some security stuff. And at one point I was pretty happy as a CIO. I said, well, we have done a good job. It's good. And now I'm just frightened about what is happening everywhere, and I'm communicating a lot to my board member about this, about what may happen. And if you mind, I will just share one slide because I just shared it 2 weeks ago to my excom. It's just to show on this slide, if you have it there, it's all public information. It's just to say that if you look at critical vulnerability, it's just increasing now. We are not even at the end of Q1, and we already have more critical vulnerability than the full 2020 years, and I don't talk about 2019. So that's kind of slide I'm using to communicate with my excom. I think it's very important to do that in a very regular basis. They have to be aware that no matter the amount of money they put on the table, no matter how good the team are, and you have to be good and you have to spend money, tomorrow you may have a risk that may happen. And unfortunately, it's the time of response that may decide if you will be attacked or your company will be damaged or not. But it's a communication to the XCOM, yeah.
Are you finding, Dominique, that as you use this slide specifically, right? It's very illustrative of the cadence and the frequency. Are you finding a different level of receptiveness from your board?
Oh, definitely.
Understanding and awareness.
I'll give you one example. We are growing mainly by external growth. Honestly, when I joined 10 years ago, we were a 4 billion euros company. And as I mentioned, we are more than 14 billion 10 years after. So we are growing 1 billion per year in average. We are doing 30 to 40 acquisitions per year of the local company. And therefore, when they joined the group, I would say 2 years ago, and from 10 to 8 years ago to 2 years ago, well, acquisition was not a CIO agenda. And, suddenly you discover a new company join the group, and the guys and the business say, oh, Dominique, by the way, can you put the exchange or the mail to them? And, you do your normal business stuff, IT stuff. Now we are incorporating the pre-acquisition process while we are doing some internal audit on the security on the pre-acquisition. And when the company joined the group, one of the very first thing we do is we run through a lots of security check, because we don't want this company, because some example exchange, we are purchasing company, they have an exchange server, local exchange server, we are in Microsoft, so we think we are protected on Office 365, but this local company can bring an issue internally. So you have to check them ahead and make sure they are clean. Right? And this is now part of the, the business is listening to this kind of remark and risk, that they get the feeling that this is a major risk. So now they open the door to IT department to help them on this subject. So yes, I think all of these crises and the COVID and all of this vulnerability you see on the day-to-day on the newspaper, because it's eating the big headline of the newspaper, help the CIO agenda if you are using it well, to communicate and get the ear of the CE leaders.
Yeah, no, that's it's good to see, right? So Andy, that's really interesting segue to you. I mean, you're a board member of board of directors of several public companies, as you mentioned. What are you seeing both in terms of cybersecurity and risk management readiness in these organizations, and what are boards of directors and audit committees requiring of these organizations that you serve in this kind of shifting climate?
I think it might be worth just taking a step back for a second and kind of talking about the landscape. Many businesses that previously had IT as a peripheral activity, or even not something that was front and center at all, maybe was a reporting line 2 levels down from the C-level. That's changed significantly in the last 3 years. In many industries that digitized sooner, like finance, maybe it changed even 20 years ago. But almost every industry or business these days is going to be a digital business in this decade, some way or another. And so there are many kinds of verticals that are now worrying and having to deal with the kind of issues that Dominique just talked about that have never dealt with them before, which is one of the reasons why there are so many unfilled posts in security. Security roles are still one of the most open roles in the world, actually, for skilled workers. So I think there's a gap in terms of the understanding of what level of capability and how many people we need in the industry to actually work on this subject. So that's the first thing I would say. And so boards worry about that. They worry about, do we have enough good people? If we double the budget every year for 5 years, is that enough? And I think also that the thing that's changed is that security and privacy as a board competency is a requirement for regulated industries. And as SaaS itself starts to become at least more driven by the needs of their clients from, let's say, a GDPR or a California privacy perspective, or ISO or PCI or any of these things, boards have to engage at a level of detailed understanding that was not required before, particularly in industries that weren't digital before. So I think that's a really, really big change. I think also that just like hybrid work, we also have hybrid IT as well. So we have some IT in the cloud and some IT on-prem. And actually what that does is increase the level of complexity and the number of points of access that these threats that Dominique outlined can come in through. Think of it as like leaving a window ajar in a house or something like that as a mechanism for entry. Two other things that have emerged both from COVID and from the threat landscape that Dominique talked about. Supply chain is so important because now the digital security of your suppliers and potentially your distributors are going to damage your ability to either build product or go to market. And that's something that I think people haven't had to really think about hard before. If you think about the car industry, where you've got a very well-defined supply chain and interfaces are very well-defined, they're way ahead in thinking about how this works. But some other industries are really only just starting to realize what their supply chain risk is. So if you look at one business that's done super well during COVID, it's businesses that focus on understanding what the supply chain is. Who are your suppliers? What countries are they in? What risks do they have? And so on and so forth. So there's a bunch of startups in that space and a couple of public companies that have done really well. The final point I'd make is that inside a threat and the definition of your level of complacency or trust for internal employees has also changed as a result of some of these threats that Dominique mentioned. I do think that people now are much more cognizant of Trojan horse style attacks and deliberate state-sponsored attacks that may include placing people inside your organization. So I think people are very attuned to it, but I think there's also evidence that the number of threats that, as described on Dominique's slide, is now increasing as a result of the success of what are essentially new approaches to cyber terrorism, right?
It's pretty insightful, right? Let's take just a second to look at, poll our audience today to see what their organization's key priorities are with secure application access today. Let's give it a few minutes so we can give everybody a chance to respond.
Time for a sip of coffee then.
Yes, absolutely. And Julia, do we have the poll response? Okay, so what are we looking at? So we're saying 67% of our attendees today's number one priority is moving beyond the VPN towards zero trust security, and the second key priority is really eliminating lateral movement with user to app and app to app segmentation. That's pretty much in line with what we've all been seeing, observing, and hearing, I believe. So it's good to see. So Dominique, you touched a little bit just earlier on, your sort of prolific M&A environment and your ability to be able to sort of ingest, assimilate these entities as they come into the broader context of the organization and the processes in place. But with everything we've just talked about so far this morning, how has your organization prepared and sort of navigated against, not just the recent, but kind of emerging threats as these assaults continue to come at you and come at us?
We are reinforcing our security team. We are reinforcing everything we can do. So I would say all the basic stuff we have done quite a lot. But as an example, we are deploying MFA at the moment, so multi-factor authentication. It was not yet there, but we started now the deployment. We make some segregation of duty between the IT administrator and the normal user. We launch a lot of campaign of cybersecurity testing of our employees. We warn them, we send lots of information. And of course, we are starting really to elaborate on this zero trust concept. So for us, it's still a concept. Well, we get it. Zero trust, I think most of the agents got the idea, but it's not so easy to be 100 compliant with such concept, because unfortunately you have to go through various phases of mastering your ecosystem, your server, your laptop, your desktop, your security. So it cannot be done like this. So we are entering now into this phase of trying to see how we can implement such technology. And at the same time, we know we have some weaknesses, so we don't want to continuously build our castle and alone, and we know there will be lateral movement. So we are trying to look more and more at what we can do in terms of a small signal on the network, on the infrastructure. And yes, we have already implemented stuff like the SOC, Security Operating Center. We have put in place as well some automation response like SOAR, so we can adapt quickly and react quickly to the attack, because we have attack almost every day, like anyone at the moment. And most of them, and most of these attacks are not so complex, I would say, to block, because they are made by automate, that trying to scroll the web, try to find any entry point and try to get in, or it's the very old phishing method. This still work, unfortunately. It's a very basic problem, but it still work a lot. So you have to respond very quickly to this kind of attack. And this is what we are trying to do now, to continue to strengthen and think by adding more and more, security around our system, that if someone pass one, it will be blocked by the second, and then we have the time, to react and to block it completely. But as I mentioned, that's something that really keep me awake at night, because security is really by far my #1 topics. It's one of the only thing I may stop any meeting at any time, just if we have an issue. That's the only thing that will completely wipe my agenda, just to concentrate on that.
That makes sense. So Andy, there was an article that was published by Howard Boville from IBM a few days ago that you shared with us. I found the article quite fascinating on the concept of the Franken cloud model being our biggest security risk. Can you help us sort of expand on that concept and kind of what it means in practicality to you and to our audience today?
Sure. When you think about security technology that's been deployed inside your infrastructure, and actually cloud technology as well, the SolarWinds attack was successful because it took advantage of a vast intermixed supply chain of technology vendors. And, there are fundamental lessons to be learned around that attack vector and how you think about it. So what many organizations have started to do with cloud is actually to intermingle or co-mix various different cloud vendors with in-house cloud built around potentially different technologies as well. So what that does is essentially increase the risk surface area that a potential attacker can go after, both on-prem and in the cloud. As I mentioned previously, the attackers now are sophisticated enough to be able to get inside and spot vulnerabilities that exist inside and exploit those almost in real time. And I'll give you a real example from the outside where a piece of infrastructure was spun up on Amazon and was literally port scanned within 3 seconds of being spun up before the security policy had been implemented, and was able to be compromised immediately, basically. And I think anybody who works in the cloud these days, I think with experience, knows that can happen. But people who are less experienced probably think that it's okay to kind of have a build structure that doesn't require the hardening to be done before you turn anything on. And so I think you should assume that ports are being scanned on everything internet facing at all times, as an example. So it's just a different way of thinking. I think you really have to think about defense, very, very seriously. But the whole Franken cloud concept really is that if you look at the sum of the number of different technologies, technology versions, and so on that you have running in your on-prem and in your cloud environments, it's that sum that represents the surface area of risk that you're trying to protect against. So the way to reduce that is to standardize and actually build cloud out as probably your most important platform. So just to kind of highlight the best in class approaches that we've seen, are where there is a centralized team whose job is to figure out, if you like, beyond VMware and actually kind of, what should this look like? How do you want it to look? And those teams generally are standardizing on, Kubernetes and Kubernetes-like technologies, similarly actually to the way IBM Cloud has. And I think there'll be a whole raft of infrastructure that exists that is already hardened coming out of vendors who are building in and around Kubernetes, but not necessarily from the projects that are all open source. I think there'll be opportunity for people to create hardened versions of that, both for government use and use in regulated industries, at least.
It was interesting, right? I mean, the article sort of alluded to an average security team using 25 to 49 tools from up to 10 different vendors. Clearly, that creates so many blind spots in their landscape vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I think about it like an iceberg almost. I mean, there's the work that's visible to, let's say, the board that the security team is doing, and that's maybe 10 to 15%, just like an iceberg. And then there's all this work that happens underneath that. And I think, being smart about how you spend your people in security is part of the trick here. So if you can buy something that eliminates a lot of that risk and that work that you don't see under the iceberg, so you can now focus on things like app to app, east west, many of the things you may not have time to get to because you've only got a finite amount of money and really a finite amount of change capacity as well. And deciding how to spend that effectively, I think, is one of the most important things.
Yeah. Oh, so true. So shifting now to zero trust as obviously the talked about approach to resolving lots of these sort of challenges we've talked about, right? Of improving security. Andy, kind of, what does the philosophy of zero trust sort of mean to you, and how are you seeing organizations sort of implement it from your perspective?
Well, I think the philosophy of zero trust is exactly as it sounds. So it's like zero trust means trust nothing, which means that you have to have a mechanism that allows you to trust nothing and still get the work done. So I think a simple example to think about, and actually relates to the poll that you just did for our attendees today, is VPN. So if you think about a VPN, you open up a VPN from your home laptop to work. And what that does is it places your laptop on the network at work, right? Your laptop can now send stuff on the network at work. It can probably port scan. There's a whole bunch of things that it can do. And really what you've done there is authenticate the user at the edge of the network and given the laptop access to the network as a result of that user authentication and potentially the laptop itself being in an AD domain or so on. And so, everyone knows that laptops go all over the place. They work in Starbucks, they work in airplanes and airports and so on, and in places where zero-day vulnerabilities can easily get into that environment. Now, if you then know that maybe there's a zero-day vulnerability on that laptop that can't be detected by any of the tooling you currently have, and that zero-day vulnerability now has a path into the enterprise through the VPN that's open, that's an example of why a zero trust solution, which instead connects the laptop via, let's say, something like ZPA through a cloud, that only allows that laptop to talk to the application servers that it's trying to talk to in regard to the application use, is such a big deal. It doesn't sound like a big deal unless you really understand the networking layer and the fact that every single port is open in a VPN for you to connect to. But I like using that analogy because almost everybody has used VPNs and they use them without necessarily thinking about the security implications of a VPN, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, very true. So Dominique, you talked a little bit, in the beginning about, how VINCI Energies is moving towards a zero trust approach, and you've advocated for it. And can you share with us, what some of the compelling reasons are that are driving you to choose a zero trust solution? I mean, what were some of the steps that you and your team had to take to arrive at sort of this decision and the need for this?
I think I can really re-emphasize what Andy just said. We are living now in a world where, by principle, I have to say, I don't want to trust anyone or any machine who try to connect to my network to do whatever they want to do, even if I'm 200, 300, 400% sure that the person or the machine which is on the other side and trying to connect is the right machine, the right person, and that this machine has not been infected by something that, even if it's the right machine and the right person, I will not get through my security. So the concept, as Andy say, I think everyone get it. You can understand it from a philosophical standpoint, but try to implement it, taking into consideration the legacy of, even if you have, we make a lots of thing in terms of legacy, where we move a lots of local server, we move a lots of things to the cloud. I mean, wow, it's very, very complex. And we are trying now to find the path to go to this level of security, but I'm honest, we are not there, and it will be a journey. It will be a journey. And specifically, if you consider all the acquisition we are doing on a yearly basis, this new, if you succeed in a small group of people, then you have to deploy it. And as you reach maybe the number of people you want, new guys will come in. And you have to as well, as soon as they join, you have to raise their standard in terms of the level of security to a bar they cannot achieve. Because most of the local companies who are purchasing are made by entrepreneurs, which is fine in our business. But IT is their number 25 or 99 priority in their list. They're taking care of the people, of the security, physical security for our workers. This is the top priority. They need to sell business, they need to have cash, they need to make revenue, profit. And IT security is not the highest topic. So when they join us, it's hard to put them to the level we want in a very quick way. So how do you manage this vision of a zero trust with new joiner? How do you mitigate the risk? I mean, I don't have yet the answer, but we are working now on it. And I think you have to prepare for a long journey on this subject.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. So and we're coming up to sort of the end of our session. And I have one final question for both of you. Andy, we'll start with you as we wrap up kind of our fireside chat today. As we know, transformation often disrupts incumbent vendors, systems, and processes, right? As Dominique just even alluded. And this requires IT professionals and leaders to have to think outside the box. And to look towards more cloud native solutions, and often people love their current suppliers and technologies that they work with and don't want to sort of embrace this change. If you have one piece of advice to give CXOs who are joining today, what would it be in terms of driving this mindset change?
Well, what I would say is don't forget what you've learned over the last year. So I'll give you an analogy. After 9/11, we had to rebuild our global network, and none of our buildings in the New York, New Jersey area connected to each other, and we couldn't connect to our international businesses in Europe or Asia. And somebody came up with the bright idea of drilling a hole into UUNet, running fiber through that hole, and running GRE tunnels over the internet. And we ran our entire business that way for 60 days after 9/11. So my next job after that was head of networks. And I got that job in November of 2001. And I tried to figure out, is there a way to build an internet overlay for all of our network? So if any of our physical circuits fail, it will just fall back to the internet. And so I built a managed service that connected every tier 1 and tier 2 site in the world over the internet, which gave us an unfair advantage for years to come after that. We had one afternoon where we were the only company that could deliver market data into Asia, which gave us a huge advantage with clients. So I think the things you've learned over the last year is that agility is important, that security is important, that hybrid work is important, and that having a well-defined strategy on cloud is super important. And so don't forget those things, remember those things, double down on them in the next 2 or 3 years, take advantage. Remember, in World War II, radar was invented, right? Radar is still being used today, right? Encryption and decryption, Alan Turing's work, these things have led to the whole topic of security that we're talking about. And these things happen very quickly during a war. And I would argue that the environment we've lived in for the last year has been like a war. It's seen the kind of acceleration that we saw in thinking and technology in World War II. So that would be what I'd leave the audience with.
Thank you so much, Andy. And Dominic, one final question for you. If you were to leave and give one piece of advice to your fellow CXOs in IT today who have joined us, what would that be? Be
paranoid. I mean, only paranoid can survive, and probably we have to be extremely paranoid, never trust and anything, just go back to basics, check everything, control, and communicate to the XCOM. I think it's very important, as Andy mentioned previously, these kind of topics, if you want to dig just under the surface, is so complex that most of the XCOM members that are business-wise and very good in business, they don't understand and they can't capture it. So they need to rely on a CIO or technical people or your security officer, whoever is in charge in the company. But you have to communicate, be able to communicate in a nice way with, I would say, a couple of nice slides, not a lot of technical detail, much more some concept so they can get it. It's very important because they need to have for them to have the buy-in. And if you have the buy-in of these people, yes, they will give you the budget to help you strengthen your security team and then to reinforce the overall security. And what was funny, and that might be my last word, my CEO just mentioned a couple of months ago, the question is no more, if we will be attacked one day, it's when will we be attacked, what do we do? How do we operate in a period when nothing is available, no ERP, no email? What do we do, Dominique? And it was the very first time he asked the question and he's trying to raise it at the C-level executive, which in our company is something new, I would say. So communicate as much as you can. It will always be good to do.
Thank you for that. Raising awareness and embracing sort of mindset change is kind of what the summary and the takeaways and building resilience it looks like from both of you. So thank you so much. I wanted to thank both of you for your time today, this afternoon, in this fireside chat.